professor at Stanford University, and I got my PhD in the late 1990s in psychology, where I studied how the brain works and made computer models of how people do reasoning and form categories. In 1999, I switched fields where I learned how to do the engineering to build virtual reality and the software to program virtual reality. And for the last 20 years, I have been building virtual reality and testing to see the effects on the brain. I study the psychology of virtual reality, and more importantly, I study what applications work in virtual reality and which ones do not. For the next 40 minutes, we're going to accomplish 3 goals. The first, all of you are going to understand the technology of virtual reality and why it's such a special time to be thinking about your business. The second, I'm going to take you through a number of psychology experiments that we've run in my lab that show an experience in virtual reality is very profound. It affects you and changes how you behave later on. Then we're going to spend the last 20 minutes talking about how these academic studies that we've run in my lab at Stanford have become products people are using in business, in government. It's a very special time for me where something I've been studying for 20 years, this is the moment where the world gets to see the technology, and it's just a real pleasure to watch my lab's findings migrate out into the world. In 2001, I gathered all of my virtual reality equipment, and I flew it all to Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, where I presented to decision makers and court justices how you can use virtual reality in the legal system. For example, how you can recreate a crime scene so that a jury or investigators can examine it. Everything else I'm going to talk about today takes as an assumption virtual reality is so real, it changes you later on. And it all presupposes that your brain treats it as real. The front of your brain, the cortex, tells you it's not a real pit. It's not a real pit. It's not a real pit. But when you fall, the back of your brain, the part that's in charge of keeping you alive, it has not yet evolved to understand that VR is not real. In psychology, we call this presence. My lab at Stanford is considered by most to be the most technologically advanced in the world. We've got great engineers, we've got good resources, we have a floor that shakes, we've got speakers embedded in the walls that can spatialize sound. We even have virtual scent so that you can smell things as they go by. It's a destination for heads of state. It's a destination for CEOs. It's a place where people come to learn about the technology. This technology that I've been studying for 20 years has now come to fruition. So Google has a product, and I talked to the decision makers there. They're funding the lab. I talked to the folks at Apple. Sony is coming out with a really nice product. Samsung, what an amazing product the Gear is. I just did a session where 100 people did virtual reality at once using the Samsung Gear. That's never happened to me before. It's a very special time where it used to be the case that labs like mine that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and we're only at top universities and labs, we've now got consumer products, and it's a really special time for me to be studying it. In my opinion, virtual reality should be reserved for things that are impossible, dangerous, expensive and rare, or counterproductive. I'm going to give you examples of all of those, but the idea is the brain treats virtual reality like it's real. Remember that guy dove. But anything is possible. You can turn physics on or off. You can travel back in time. You can change your body. You can have 3 arms. There's no rules, but the brain treats it as real. It's a very special paradox where humans have not yet evolved to understand VR, so we treat it like an actual experience, but you can break all the rules. And that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of today. The point of my talk today is to think about creativity. VR is the essence of creativity. In the creativity literature, where I publish often, we want to overcome what psychologists call functional fixedness. You want to get out of your routine. You want to see the world from a different light. Virtual reality was designed for creativity. What you're seeing here is a study that we did where we gave somebody a third arm. How do you control a third arm? It's complicated, but you can figure out how to remap wrist rotations, leg twitches, and someone can learn to control a third arm. These are the types of things we're going to talk about today. Simulations that completely warp your normal routine, that change the way you think and the way you act. So the first study we published in this was over a decade ago. Since then, we've run many, many experiments that demonstrate, compared to the control condition, which is role-playing or reading case studies, when you become someone else and experience prejudice, this changes your behavior later on. In other words, when you walk a mile in someone else's shoes, when you feel what it's like to be them, you're more likely to change your attitude and behavior. So as of very recently, we are working with the National Football League to build an experience for them to help train their employees, their executives, to have a better way of learning about race, gender, discrimination of all sorts. So it's a really powerful tool. You become someone else, experience it, and it's a nice way to think about change. So a 5-minute, a 10-minute experience in virtual reality, saving someone's life, actually makes you nicer, more altruistic in the physical world. So the first study that we wanted to talk about was recycling paper. We did 2 things in this study. The first thing we did is we asked them if they planned on recycling more. Everybody, regardless of condition, when you asked them, they said afterward they planned to use less paper and recycle. But the only group that actually changed their behavior was the group in the virtual reality condition. So we built a study where subjects walked up to a virtual mirror and we'd actually scanned their faces so they got to see their own face in the mirror. They did body transfer. Then I hit a button and their mirror image aged before their eyes. We ran a dozen studies, published this in a very good academic journal that showed that meeting your future self in virtual reality is more effective than any control condition you can imagine at getting people to put money in the bank. Imagine you're walking down a shopping mall and we scan your avatar's body. We scan your physical body. And by the time you get 10 meters later, we've built an avatar of you on a billboard and you see yourself using a product you've never used on a billboard, and beautiful people love you because you're using that product. We call this self-endorsing. The dream of advertisers is to match an endorser to the demographic. So if you're trying to market to teenagers, you find a very famous celebrity teenager that they can relate to. But who's more relatable to you than you? And Grace, in her experiments, which she published in the Journal of Advertising, demonstrated that seeing yourself in virtual reality using products caused more brand retention, more brand preference. In sum, it was a great way to do advertising. It's called Striver. Striver is changing the way athletes train. Everything we learn from football applies to corporations and stores, and whatever your business model is, it applies. So the largest retailer on the planet, can't say their name yet, but one of the largest retailers on the planet, is now taking the system we built for football and teaching people how to walk down a supermarket and survey quickly the aisle to see if anything's out of place. In the factory, to find out really quickly, is somebody holding a ladder wrong? Is there a safety issue? So let's learn how to make mistakes when it's free, when it's not going to hurt ourselves or others. And what we're finding, because we started out as a sports training company. Every application that worked in sports, when we meet with the CEO of a big company, she says, oh, I could use that for interview training. I could use that for training a salesperson on how to be consistent. There's so many applications. So to conclude, VR is here. It's a special moment. Remember that VR is profound. It is not a media experience. You're not watching something. You're doing it. And we've got time for questions and answers, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thank you. How can VR influence healthcare? That's the first question I'm going to answer. One of the best uses of virtual reality in the history of virtual reality is treating pain. So VR is so distracting, you feel so present in the physical world, in the virtual world, you actually forget the physical world. So in 1995, Hunter Hoffman used VR to treat burn victims. So imagine you had a bad burn and you had to change your bandage. Very painful. But now imagine you went in virtual reality and we put you in Snow World. You got to be in this very cold place. Subjective pain goes down by 70%. I'd like to thank you again for your attention and have a lovely night.